Shema Israel, Yahweh Eloheinu, Yahweh Echad. V'havta Yahweh Elohecha, v'chol avecha, v'chol nafshecha, v'chol merecha. V'hayu haverim hale asher anochi mesavecha hayom al avecha. V'shalantam levanecha v'tivartavam. V'shivatecha bevetecha uvletecha. V'yarech u'shvecha uvkomecha. U'shaktam leot al yadecha v'hayu letotafot benenecha. U'tatam lemezuzot petecha v'sharecha. Hear, O Israel, Yahweh our Elohim, Yahweh is one. You shall love Yahweh your Elohim with all your heart, and with all your being, and with all your resources. And these words that I command you today shall be in your heart, and you shall teach them diligently to your children. And you shall speak of them when you sit at home, and when you walk along the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. And you shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be for frontlets between your eyes. And you shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates.
Hallelujah. Shabbat shalom, everyone. Greetings to the people in the outreach ministry. We just finished observing Passover and the days of unleavened bread. And during his Passover discourse, Yahshua said this to his disciples in John 15 and verse 11. We're going to read several verses from Yeshua's discourse to his disciples that last Passover. And he said this in John 15:11. These words I have spoken to you so that my joy might be in you and that your joy might be complete or full. So one of the things that we said Chag Sameach, which means joyful feast, but we didn't talk much about joy at the feast. And certainly when we come away from the Passover and the days of unleavened bread, we should be pumped up with a sense of joy as we move toward Shavuot. John 15 and verse 1. So we're going to talk a little bit about joy. We're going to try to stir up. We're going to talk about positive things about joy, how we should be joyful. And that's certainly difficult in the world that we live in today. There's all kinds of garbage going on and corruption, and it's hard to see through all that. And sometimes we create our own little world of what we see, and we try to kid ourselves about the joy that's in it, and we don't need to do that because Yahweh has separated us out for special joy. Yahshua promised that the words that he spoke, if they're followed, would make our joy complete. In John 15:1, earlier he had said, I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardener. Every branch in me that bears no fruit, he takes away. So obviously, if fruit is not born and they're taken away, they certainly didn't have any joy, did they? And every branch that bears fruit, he prunes so that it bears more fruit. You are already clean because of the word which I have spoken to you. Stay in me, and I stay in you. And, he had already spoken to his taught ones earlier when he said in Matthew 24, he that does what to the end? Endures to the end. Is that the same thing as staying in him? I think it is. He that stays in me, I stay in him. Stay in me and I stay in you. As the branch is unable to bear fruit of itself, none of us can bear fruit without the Ruach HaKodesh. Unless it stays in the vine, so neither you unless you stay in me. I am the vine, verse 5, you are the branches. He who stays in me and I in him, he bears much fruit, because without me you are unable to do anything. So no matter what we might picture the future to be, if Yahshua and Yahweh are not in that picture, it's going to come to nothing. If anyone does not stay in me, he is thrown away as a branch and dries up. And they gather them and throw them into the fire, and they are burned. If you stay in me, and my words stay in you, you shall ask whatever you wish, and it shall be done for you. In this my Father is esteemed, that you bear much fruit, and you shall be my taught ones. As the Father has loved me, I have also loved you. Stay in my love. If you guard my commands, you shall stay in my love, even as I have guarded my Father's commands and stay in his love. If you have the ISR scriptures, you have a note there to 14:15, chapter 14, verse 15. It's still part of this discourse at that last Passover celebration that Yahshua did with his disciples. Because he had said in chapter 14, John, and verse 15, if you love me, you shall guard my commands. And we talked about this several times during the feast, that the ones, when Yeshua's disciples came to him and said, hey, your mother and your brothers and sisters are outside. We pointed out that Yeshua said, who are my brothers? Who are my sisters? Who is my mother? The ones doing the desire of my Father. That's my real family. That's the family that matters. So he says, if you love me, you shall guard my commands. It goes all the way back to Exodus chapter 20. Exodus chapter 20, where Yahweh told the Israelites in the giving of the Ten Commandments that he is the one who shows kindness to thousands, to those who love me and guard my commands. So Yeshua wasn't just pulling this out and making it part of a new covenant. It goes all the way back to that covenant that he was certifying, if you will, back in Exodus chapter 20. 1 John chapter 5 and verse 2. Same author as the one who recorded Yeshua's words at that last Passover. He remembered them, and it's not new. They're the words of Yeshua way back in Exodus. They are the words of Yeshua at his last Passover. Verse 2 of chapter 5 of 1 John. By this we know that we love the children of Elohim, when we love Elohim and guard his commands. For this is the love for Elohim, that we guard his commands, and his commands are not heavy. His commands are not heavy. So again, it all comes down to that statement of Yeshua when he told his disciples, who's my mother? Who are my brothers? Who are my sisters? Who is my family? The ones doing the will of his Father, the desire. In chapter 1, well, I guess, I don't know, maybe there's only one chapter in 2 John. In 2 John, verse 6, and this is the love. So, Christians have all kinds of ideas what love is. Love is excusing sin. Isn't that really a Christian idea? Love is not judging someone who is violating Torah. Isn't that what Christians say love is? But here's the definition of love: walking according to Yahweh's commands. This is the command that, as you have heard from the beginning, you should walk in it. Where did they hear it from the beginning? Well, we read it in Exodus chapter 20 in verse 6. It's not something new. And yet, how can a religion supposedly based on the words of the Savior, how can they not know what love is? And yet they don't, because they haven't heard from the beginning. John chapter 16, back again in that discourse that Yeshua gave to his disciples in that last Passover. Until now, he says in verse 24, John 16, 24, Until now, you've asked nothing in my name. Ask and you shall receive, in order, what is his desire? In order that your joy might be complete. Now, you know, some people would read that and say, well, I'm going to ask him to win the lotto. Do you think that would make somebody's joy complete, to win the lotto? We kind of think that in the backs of our minds, especially if we're really young. But how many of you have read about the people who have won the lotto and what happiness, they enjoyed? There are a lot of them that didn't enjoy much happiness, aren't there? A lot of them came to ignominious ends. Joy is rendered from the Greek in the New Testament, chara. It's the same word that we get character from. If you win the lotto and you have all the money in the world at your disposal, are the chances very good that you're going to have good character? No, it doesn't. And that's there's a witness to that in the lives of the people who have won it. With all the people who've won the lotto, you'd think there'd be no homeless, because if they really realized what joy was, they'd bail those, they would make sure that those people got bailed out. But there's more. No, it just breeds more selfishness. So chara, and it means cheerfulness, delight, joyfulness. And so it is not far-fetched to read these scriptures and understand that the Greek was carrying the right word. The Hebrew word is simcha. And it is the same word that we use when we say chach sameach, rejoicing or joyfulness. In Jeremiah 15 and verse 16, we read this: your words were found, and I ate them, Jeremiah says to Yahweh. And your word was to me the joy and rejoicing of my heart. How many of you would contemplate winning the lotto and exchanging all the money that you could win there with the word, so that you could have the word of Yahweh? That's where the real rejoicing and joy is. For your name is called on me, O Yahweh, Elohim of hosts. So the word, which is Yahshua, the word is what can provide real joy, real rejoicing. And what we pictured in Pesach was the redemption, or we might say the calling. Someone wrote me a letter recently and expressed that to him, at least, that redemption meant calling. And I think he's right. I think he's onto something there. The calling of Yahweh. Oh, all we have to do is look at the world. Just look at the world. Look how few people understand what Yahweh has given to you and to me. I mean, they're just like in the song, the chosen few. It isn't very many, so it is precious. So this word that's used here, and if you check the New Testament in the Hebrew, you would find that this same word is used for joy to replace the Greek chara. Chara actually is a translation, a Greek translation of the Hebrew simcha. It means blithesomeness, or glee, gladness, pleasure, rejoicing. In Acts chapter 2 and verse 28, Acts chapter 2 and verse 28, we read this: you have made known to me the ways of life. You shall fill me with joy in your presence. There's where joy comes from. If you're looking for joy somewhere else, you're probably not going to find it. It's going to be very temporary, it's going to be fragile, and it's going to be fleeting. The real joy and eternal gladness and happiness comes from Yahweh and knowing him. You see, you have a footnote there if you have the ISR scriptures, Psalm 16, 8 through 11. Though the word joy only appears in the last verse, we're going to read all 4 verses, 8 through 11. Because this is what the writer, Acts chapter 2, which was Kepha, has in mind. Psalm 16:8, I have set Yahweh always before me. Because he is at my right hand, I am not shaken. So it doesn't matter, how miserable we might be with sickness, financial problems, things that come upon us in the world that just beat everybody down. They don't have to beat us down if Yahweh is at our right hand. We will not be shaken. Therefore, the psalmist writes, my heart was glad. There's that gladness. And my esteem rejoices. My flesh also dwells in safety. Though danger is all around us, if we have Yahweh, we can dwell, and we do dwell in safety. We just have to know how to take advantage of it, quote unquote advantage. For you do not leave my being in the grave. And of course, these probably are thoughts that Yahshua had in mind for hanging there on that tree. You do not leave my being in the grave, neither let your kind one see corruption. He didn't stay in the grave long enough to be corrupted. In other words, to have the rotting process begin on his body. But we can all say this, you show me the path of life. In your presence is joy to satisfaction. At your right hand are pleasures forever. So that's what Kepha had in mind when he wrote what he did, or when he spoke what he did, as recorded in Acts chapter 2:28. Another word for joyfulness or gladness in the Greek is euphrosune. Euphrosune. We have a word, euphemism, which is a more pleasant statement of something that might not be so pleasant. But we also have the word euphoria. Euphoria. And if you felt euphoria, how many of you felt euphoria? Yeah? People here have felt euphoria. It's a kind of gladness, of a lifting of the spirit. Lifting of the spirit. There's nothing that gives you more euphoria than knowing Yahweh and knowing Yahweh's calling. The equivalent in Hebrew is sason or sasone. And in the Hebrew, it means cheerfulness. Cheerfulness, gladness, and again, joy, mirth, rejoicing. And so those are the words that we're finding as used in Acts 2:28 with Peter, and in the Psalms 16, verses 8 through 11. In 1 Peter chapter 1 and verse 7, we read this as a wish that Peter had. Peter had for the elect lady, which he was writing to the Bikkurim of his time. In order that the proving of your belief, and if you go to the Hebrew New Testament and check this word belief, it is translated from the Hebrew word emunah. Emunah is belief, but in Hebrew, belief is not a Greek feeling, but it is action, and it is the action of obedience. In order that the proving of your belief, how do you prove your belief? By what you do, by the actions. Much more precious than gold that perishes, winning the lotto. Obedience to the truth gives much more pleasure than winning the lotto. Or winning, what's that other thing? Publishers Clearinghouse sweepstakes or some other sweepstakes. Because those are going to perish. And proven by fire, by trials. Because your action is what carries you through the trials of sickness, the trials of financial woes, the trials of family problems, because you put Yahweh first. You put Yahweh first. They might be found to result in praise and respect and esteem at the revelation of Yeshua Messiah, which is Yahweh Yeshua, the Messiah, the Yeshua that became the Messiah, whom, having not seen, any of you seen Yeshua? No? Maybe in the back of your mind or in your imagination, but nobody here has actually seen Yeshua. But you, not seeing him, you still love him. And how do you prove you love him? By obeying him, guarding his commands. In whom you exult with unspeakable and esteemed joy, yet not seeing, but believing. And again, this word is from emunah, which in the Hebrew carries with it action, obedience, doing what he commands. Back in 1 John again, here's some more from this beloved disciple that Yeshua had special affection for. 1 John chapter 1 and verse 1. 1 John 1, verse 1. Now, isn't it interesting that 1 John 1:1 talks about the Reshith, just like the Gospel John 1:1 and Genesis 1:1. What was from the beginning, Reshith, what we have heard, what we have seen with our eyes, what we have looked upon, and our hands have handled. And here was an individual that not only saw Yeshua, sat next to him at the Passover, handled him after his resurrection, all of those things. He actually did it concerning the word of life. And he recognized that this Yeshua Messiah, Yahweh Yeshua, was the word of life. And the life was manifested by what? By action, by a way of life, by a manner of living. And we have seen and bear witness and announce to you that everlasting life which was with the Father and was manifested to us. We announce to you what we have seen and heard, so that you too might have fellowship with us. And truly our fellowship is with the Father and with his Son, Yeshua Messiah. And then he says in verse 4, and we write this to you. You know, we witness this to you. Our whole purpose in our lives after the impalement, the death, and the resurrection of Yeshua Messiah, our whole purpose in this, and to relate it to you in order that your joy might be complete. Exactly the words of Yeshua on that night when he told them that he was speaking these words so that their joy might be complete. 2 John chapter 1 and verse 12. He says, having much to write to you, I did not wish to do so with paper and ink, but I expect to come to you and speak face to face, so that our joy together might be complete. Notice how many times Yeshua and his disciples wrote about joy being complete. Joy being complete. Another word for complete in the Hebrew is shalom. That's what shalom means. It really means complete. It doesn't just mean peace, the absence of war. Psalm 103. Psalm 103, beginning in verse 17, 18, and 19. So where is this? Should we feel this joy? You know, is it easy when trials come upon us, beset us, and when we look at what's going on in the world and what our position is, and when we consider what our children are going through and our grandchildren, is it easy to get discouraged and maybe even depressed? Well, here's the way out of all of that, because we more than anybody else on the face of this earth, we have the keys to joy. We have the key to joy. Psalm 103, beginning in verse 17. The kindness of Yahweh is from everlasting to everlasting upon those who fear him. Do you know people in the world who think they fear him, but they actually fear a God or a JC? But we know who. We know who to fear. Verse 18. To those who guard his covenant. Because if you guard his covenant, you're doing what's pleasing in the Father's sight, and Yahshua calls you family. And to those who remember his orders to do them. It isn't a matter of just knowing them. Partly of what our discussion was last night, it's a matter of doing, isn't it? Verse 19, Yahweh has established his throne in the heavens. Do you believe that? We believe that. And his reign shall rule over all. That's verse 19. Psalm 146 in verse 3. Psalm 146 in verse 3 to remind us that Yahweh and Yahweh Yahshua HaMashiach, have preeminence. They have preeminence, and their kingdom is going to come. They are the way and the truth and the only way to ultimate happiness. Psalm 146 and verse 3, not my words. Do not put your trust in princes, in the Son of Man, in whom is no deliverance. Put your trust in Yahweh. Psalm 9 and verse 10. Psalm 9 and verse 10. And those who know your name trust in you. Remember, we just read a psalm that said, don't put your trust in men. Those who know your name put their trust in you. For you have not forsaken those who seek you, O Yahweh. So, I might say that the reason I brought the message, Yahweh and our inheritance, and the outcome of Pesach and the days of unleavened bread is so that you might have your joy complete. Because I wanted you to realize how special and precious is your calling. So may Yahweh bless you and guard you. May Yahweh make his face shine upon you and give you his favor. May Yahweh lift up his countenance over you and continue to give you his peace. Yirakeka Yahweh vayishmareka. Ya'er Yahweh panav aleka vikaneka. Yasa Yahweh panav aleka v'yisem laka shalom.